Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Leo with the MindBodyMarathon. And on today's episode, we will be speaking with Eric Bray. And I am from Northeast Ohio, greater Cleveland, Akron area. And Eric has been a staple in the running community for decades. And I've known Eric for a couple decades. Eric, in March 6th of 2019, was diagnosed with urothelial cancer and was given less than a year to live. And as you know from this podcast, he surpassed that. He was able to make it on the show. And this was a great episode for us because he wanted to get on air and, tell some stories about running and just kind of share some of his knowledge of the sport, for his family to kind of hear in the future and for his grandkids and for all of us involved in the running community. So this was a pretty emotional episode for both him and I. And thank you so much for listening and joining us on this episode. Appreciate it. Enjoy. All right, yo, everybody. This is the Mind Body Marathon show talking today with Eric Bray, local running legend here in Northeast Ohio. And we got him on the set, and which is very exciting. So he's going to tell us some running wisdom and some insights from his storied career. So thank you for joining us. And without further ado, Eric, tell us how you got into running.
I think it was almost predestination. Background, when my wife, Betsy, was coaching high school cross country, she had a parent come to her and ask her how his daughter could become an Olympian. And Betsy said, the first and foremost thing she must do, is pick her parents. She said the best coaching, the most dedicated athlete can't make a greyhound out of a golden retriever.
Yeah.
I picked my parents. In the 1930s, Akron East was a state cross-country power. They won a couple championships. I think they were runner-up a couple times.
Yeah.
And contended for almost a decade. My father.
Wild to think about.
Now it is. My father was part of that.
Yeah.
And he, in turn, married a very petite, small-boned woman.
Yeah.
And here I am with my father's heart and lungs, major engine and a lightweight chassis, destined to be a runner. Now, from there, when I was about 6, the story takes a turn. I was a victim of the polio epidemic. And as such...
So what year were you born?
48.
48.
And damaged the muscles across my chest and shoulder so that even today I can't throw a baseball overhand. But it turned my feet inward. I was severely pigeon-toed.
Okay.
Now, in the 1950s, there was no sports med. There wasn't even physical therapy like we know it.
Right.
And nobody quite knew what to do with the polio survivors. Literally in a recovery appointment, my mother was given an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with the instructions, if you can get him to do these exercises, it might help. Now, I'm 6 going on 7, and the idea of doing these exercises, guess what, folks? And my mother's frustration in trying to get me to do these exercises bubbled over one day. And she just blurted to me, if you don't do these exercises, you aren't going to be able to keep up with the other kids.
There you go. That's good
intel. I took that. Here's my escape road. If I can show my mom that I'm as fast or faster than the other kids, I don't have to do these exercises.
So you took that totally different direction.
And I set about learning to run and literally, it started out just me trying to run up and down the street, around the block. Subsequently, went to the library in the kids section, found a book called Track and Field for Boys and read it. And yeah, by the time I was in the 6th grade, I was fast enough to represent my grade school in the citywide fitness championship. Now, here's the fun part, and you'll enjoy this one. Boston Marathon. In the last half mile, there's a little connector street that takes you off of Beacon and up to Boylston called Hereford.
Yeah.
The street I lived on, my parents lived on for 50 years, that I learned to run on was...
Yeah, Hereford. I used to live on that street.
I know you did. That's why I said I brought this in. Yeah. So
I actually didn't know that was the name of the street in Boston. You take that right. Right, and then a left.
Yep. And some of my best runs were finished up that little grade on that little connector street.
Yeah.
So that's how I became a runner. And it kind of just built from there.
Yeah, and I'm sure you had some early success, and that kind of tied you in and kept you going.
I got cut in the 7th grade. I got cut my sophomore year.
Those were hard cuts back in the day, too. Now everybody can just run.
And then my junior year in high school, I was on a very good track team with a new and very good coach, and with runners who had gone on to make their mark. Mike Fisher, for instance, was Big Ten steeplechase champion.
Yeah.
Wayne Doc Tompkins held the cross-country record for the Ohio cross-country course for many years. Those were the first 2 dogs. I was probably the 5th or 6th best 800-meter man we had.
Yeah.
What we didn't have, it turned out, literally the day before our first meet, was a high jumper. The coach put up a high jump setup in the gym with some mats and said, anybody here can do that? And I could jump. And one of the other kids said, well, Eric can dunk, which wasn't true. I could grab the rim. I couldn't dunk. And so I managed to flip myself over this bar, which may have been a whole 5 feet for all I remember now. And I became the school's high jumper for 2 years.
That's amazing.
And my buddy Jim Parks, was in the same position I was, but had a much wider wingspan. Well, Jim threw discus for 2 years. Because that's how high school track was back then.
Yeah.
You filled the gaps with what you had.
Yep.
And so by the time I got to Akron U, I was a high jumper, triple jumper there. I ran cross country strictly for conditioning.
That is amazing.
And then down the road, I ended up back on the roads.
Yeah. So, okay. So when did you start marathoning?
Well, we need to back up a little bit. I was out of college working as an accountant, and I happened to be living right behind Bill Heidemann. And one day, walking literally from my office to home, Heidemann was out and said, "You're getting fat. Come train with us." Now, this is at the point in time when Summit Athletic Club was a pure race club.
Yeah.
That you became a member of Summit by being sponsored by existing runners and recognized. And so I started running with Heidemann and the group that was meeting at his house, and really was training to be a 5K runner. And that's what Bill envisioned me as.
Yeah.
I had known Bill from summer track programs and that. AA,
Where was he coaching at the time?
at that point in time, he had just come to Firestone.
Okay. Yeah, there's the famous race series that starts off every cross season called the Heidemann Race Series. And for any of the local people and non-local people, and so that's who he's referencing is Bill from that.
Yep. And so he was at Firestone. He hadn't moved to Bookville yet. And looking back at it, and again, the quality of the runners he invited me to join, he saw something in me that I didn't realize I had.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a running group that was headed by Rick Sayre, Ham Amer, Dennis Torma, Tim McFadden, who went on to become an outstanding bicycle racer, good enough to train at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Boulder, Colorado. And while there, he once sent me back a note saying, "You won't believe this punk-ass kid from Texas. He's got more talent than any of us." And he was talking about Lance Armstrong.
That's amazing.
But Mac was there with Lance. But anyhow, and another runner who also, most people today don't realize how good a runner he was, went on to be an outstanding coach. That was John Scott. Scotty was an excellent coach and blessed with a kick. Now, again, I'm telling stories.
Yeah.
Sorry, John. It's out of the bag.
Yeah.
The world knows now. But yeah.
I just remember him from coaching, long-time coach at Bookville when I was in high school.
Oh, yeah. Hall of Fame coach in Ohio.
Yeah.
And so that was the group I was training with. And we, at the end of one fall, Tim McFadden had decided he wanted to try a marathon. And he wanted to do Marine Corps in Washington, D.C. Now, I traveled to D.C. regularly on business. And Mac, I don't think had ever been out, definitely not out of Ohio, and I don't think out of the tri-state area. So I said, yeah, I'll go with you, and we'll run it together.
Yeah.
And I ended up with a respectable finish. And we didn't lose Mac in the subways or the big city. And that led to what happened the following spring. Cleveland Marathon was also the National Marathon Team Championship.
So what time frame are we talking about? What years?
Maybe 1979, 1980.
Okay.
And Jim Collette, again, another local legend, was Summit Athletics team coordinator, captain, president, sponsor, secure, transportation director, you name it. Jim was everything to the competitive group.
Yeah.
And the Cleveland Marathon was first weekend in May. And Cleveland also had an outstanding 10K. And I had trained to run the 10K and walked into registration. And somebody said, "Jim's looking for you." And I said, okay. I went and found Jim. He said, and basically the conversation was, "I need fresh legs for tomorrow in the marathon. I want to know that we're going to finish a team. I'm not doubling anybody back up that ran Boston."
Yeah.
And he showed me a list of 3 names, and he said, "Who do you think should run 5th?" And I, being my usual smart-ass self, said, "Jim, I can beat all those guys." He says, "I know. Your number's over at the marathon desk. Go pick it up." And I literally went home, told Betsy, "I'm running the marathon tomorrow." And had pancakes for lunch, a good salad for dinner.
Call it a day.
And called it a day. And my instructions were go out, run steady. If somebody in front, if one of the first four gets in trouble, I'll get the word to you. And I did, and they didn't. And at the end of the day, I have a national championship to my credit.
Nice.
Crazy. No, but yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is looking back.
That's so cool that they did stuff like that too back then. I feel like marathons are just kind of boring now, and they don't do any fun competitions like that.
Boston always had a team competition, and we were good there. Summit.
So, okay, so when do you think they stopped that? We could probably look it up, but that's crazy they did that.
I think we lost it when Jock Semple and Will Cloney retired. They went through a couple race directors that, quite frankly, were a disaster, and lost sponsorships, longtime sponsorships, big sponsorships there. But so I think that's probably when we lost it at Boston.
Yeah.
And but I remember one year at Boston, we always stayed out in Newton, in a hotel that was just across the Mass Pike from the course. And we could half-mile jog down and train on Newton, do our warm-ups and pre-runs on the Newton Hills. And there was a little neighborhood grocery store in just a strip of stores. And we went down one day, myself and another runner, just to stock the room. We normally got in on Friday and Saturday, Sunday, and the race is Monday, to stock the room. And we're waiting in line with our bananas and our apples, our fresh baked oatmeal cookies and jugs of juice. And the cashier looks at us. You guys are the team from Ohio. We went, yeah. You still staying up on the hill? Yeah. You're going to beat our Boston boys this year? We're going to give them a run. She says, well, I'll be out front watching. And the whole time she's having this conversation with us, she is checking out the person in front of us. And I'm sitting there absolutely just slack-jawed.
Yeah.
Because the person in front of us is M.L. Carr, the sixth man for the Boston Celtics.
Oh my gosh.
Who are about to enter the playoffs. And she's talking to two skinny guys from Ohio that she only sees 2 or 3 times for 2 or 3 days once a year.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that's what Boston was then and to the community.
Right, right.
But yeah, so that
that's so cool.
Yeah. So that's
just again, like students of the sport, just appreciating the amount of talent coming in and just being aware of it too.
Yeah, it's still a huge thing. And but
what's interesting is it's not huge internationally. My brother-in-law is from Brazil, and talking with his European friends and Brazilians, they want to come here and run, Chicago. They want to run fast to Chicago.
Oh.
They want to maybe do New York because it's just cool. They don't ever think about Boston. And same with, a lot of the Europeans, they're just not into it in the same way.
And maybe it meant more for my generation because we did grow up with it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it is a distinctly American thing. It's obviously got its international pool now, but it's a distinctly American running thing.
And it was also, it wasn't something, fill out your entry form, sign your check, send it in. Boston, still requires a qualifier, and they've toughened the qualifications again this year.
Yeah.
But when the period I'm talking about, they had lowered the qualifying time for men from 3 hours down to 2:50.
Yeah.
And they were constantly, you'd hear Jock Semple the whole weekend saying, there are too many here. There are too many here. We got to get it at least to 2:45 next year. And so there was to qualify for Boston then was an accomplishment.
Yeah.
It was, the everyday, I say the everyday runners, and including myself. That was probably, the Olympic trials was, again, a step before on that.
Yeah.
But basically, the two races that you needed to qualify for
Yeah.
were Boston and the trials. And so that to accomplish it, and then the stories that have come back about the community and about Boston. This is, again, we're talking a point in time before all the organized and well-stocked water stops and things.
Yeah.
That one of the stories I like to tell is my first year there. I encountered, families would set up literally a card table with Dixie cups and water. And the Boston Globe, the big newspaper, printed the entire list of all the entrants, which at that time was 4,500 probably. And the routine was that one parent would have a set of binoculars and they would pick out a number. And then they'd look it up. And then as you went by, they'd cheer for you by name.
Oh my God, that is amazing.
Yeah. And especially, this was out in the early suburbs, out in
Yeah.
Ashland and, and so on. And they'd have also these family water stops. And I never forget going by, and there's a little kid, I mean, maybe 4 or 5, but he knows how to hold a water cup. His hand is flat and the cup is here so I can scoop it.
Yeah.
And as I take it, the little kid says, "Thank you."
Wow. That's so cool.
And
I love that.
That's the kind of thing that laid the foundation for Boston being Boston.
Yeah.
And then, there's another story just on how into it the community was.
Yeah.
Had a teammate who blistered badly and in the hills just stopped, sat down on the curb, and he was done. And person sits down next to him and says, and starts to untie his shoes. And teammate looks at him and doesn't quite know what to do, but help getting his shoes off at the 19-mile mark of a marathon doesn't hurt,
I know,
especially
right?
when your feet are blistered. The next thing he knows, the guy is slipping on a pair of essentially brand New Balance trainers onto his feet. Says, "These will get you to the finish."
My goodness.
And teammate says, "How do I get them back to you?" And he looks at the bloody racing flats and says, "No, we just traded." Picked him up and literally shoved him back into the race.
Wow. That is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So, okay. So speaking of water slides, what was it like nutrition wise in races like that back then? Like, what did you guys take in as fuel? Was it just like water?
On the course, it was water. That by the time I started running, which again, late 70s, we had something called ERG, which was electrolyte replacement with glucose. This was much less sophisticated than even Gatorade.
Yeah.
Or Powerade, let alone all the things we see now. And so Boston had water and ERG. We didn't have it nearly as frequently. But again, we had the community. The joke was anything you needed, you could get within a half a mile.
Yeah.
That the one thing that I seem to always need, because I'm not a good heat runner, was it seemed like there was always ice when I wanted it.
Yeah.
I could scoop ice and get an ice cube and stick it in my cheek. Ice and orange slices were the things that were usually available besides
So cool.
water and erg. As far as nutrition, there were no gels or anything. And the absolute fallback, if you thought you were, to use runner slang, going to bonk, was bit o' honey.
Yeah.
Now, you may know, for people out there, that bit o' honey is a honey taffy, basically.
That is so cool. You guys use bit o' honey.
Yeah, well, yeah, this is before power bars, remember? I mean, Brian Maxwell,
Yeah.
the power bar came along much later. And gels, wow.
Yeah.
That's a quantum leap. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So Eric, what does running mean to you?
What does it mean to me? Friendships.
Yeah.
End-to-end friendships led me to probably the best job I ever had, which was selling running shoes and telling stories like this.
Yeah.
No, it's the friendships, I guess, and they're lifelong friendships. I was, again, much later, I was at a road race in Cleveland, and at the end of the race, and this will tell you how things have changed now. At this point in time, both the Plain Dealer and the Akron Beacon Journal had sports writers assigned to running. They literally, there would be a running article and road race results in Monday's paper.
Yeah.
And we were standing, myself and Brian Sobchak, another runner who almost always beat me. But we were standing talking to the Plain Dealer writer. This is up in Lakewood. And the writer said to us, now you guys are about to turn 40. You're about to become masters. There's now masters money up and serious recognition.
Yeah.
I said, ask us if we had any thoughts. And Brian shrugged and said, nah, I'm still going to be racing him. And those are the kind of friendships and the kind of compliments that, to this day last. That again, so I guess, now to have another generation runner in the house also helps.
Yeah.
And having a wife who coached both at the high school and college level and all those relationships. But yeah, it's the people, the friendships.
Yeah. It's a unique sport with, just a general sense of like badge of honor, because it takes a special kind of person to do the sport. And then, there's this enduring together, and that just kind of ties it together. And generally type A individuals that are kind of goofy also.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a unique blend. If you join a high school cross team, you got a bunch of future successful people around you, but they're all kind of goofy at the same time.
Well, I can say we to you, but we're not big enough to be football players or tall enough to be basketball players or anything. Yeah, but, and the training together, you form bonds that, my son Mike's wedding party, every one of the groomsmen was from his high school cross-country team.
That's so cool.
That yeah, so it's those relationships. I remember, again, I'll tell a story relayed from my wife that one year at the high school, the band director announced that marching band would be it. There would be no sharing with other programs. And she had a runner who was on the cross-country team and also in the band. And she expected to lose David because David had some other issues. He had some difficulties. And the following Monday after this announcement, there was David at practice. And the kids all gather around. It's basically what gives. And David said, well, I had my choice of playing the trumpet and hanging out with majorettes or coming here and throwing up with you guys. And I decided this is where I belong. They voted him captain.
That's cool. That's fun. I know I can totally relate to that. That's great.
Yeah.
So now you were an accountant most of your life, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And then what industry were you in?
The industry would be called tax-exempt organizations. I, in fact, was an accountant for a labor union.
Okay.
And as such, yeah.
So you needed running to keep you sane.
Yeah. I composed a lot of presentations, a lot of letters, a lot of appeals, a whole lot of things in the solitude of a run.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it was important, and it was stress release for sure. But it was, yeah.
I know I tell the story all the time of how when I was in grad school, I was a teaching assistant at the same time. I was working at a running shoe store, and I was the fittest I was ever in my life. And I was getting a doctor of chiropractic and a master's at the same time. So I had a lot I was doing. And I basically studied while I ran because I would go to class and I would just like run right after class.
Mhm.
Even if it was just like a short run, like 20, 30 minutes, like I would just like ruminate about what I learned and I literally would not have to study it.
Yeah.
It's like amazing what the mind does when you run.
It really is. And no, I also had the primary responsibility of internal auditing, and there were any number of runs where the audit and the review that I was doing came into focus on a run where I realized, okay, and likewise drafting presentations for the board and so forth. Later on, putting together proposals for federal grants for health and safety training and things.
Yeah.
That running, that rhythm, whatever.
Well, it's the rhythm of it. You know, you're moving, you're shaking. You know, things are kind of just you get into the zone. The other big thing is you get quite a bit of enhanced blood flow. You get up to 2 to 3 times more blood flow to the brain during a run, and you get a release of called brain-derived nerve growth factor, which is basically a fancy way of saying that it's a hormone that communicates to your brain to grow more neurons and more axonal connections, so more brain connections. And that's literally released during the run. And so while you're running, you're actually forming new connections in unique ways. So you're kind of literally creating novel thoughts. Like, it's just phenomenal to think about. And that's why, like, I talk to so many people, I'm like, put away your phone. Like, don't listen to music when you run. Like, go just silence, because your brain is doing amazing things. I mean, it's visualizing the race, it's visualizing the run. It's going through, it's kind of rummaging itself. And then it's also coming up with these novel ideas.
You hit on something else that I found just throughout the entire time that was important. And you talked about not listening to music. I found how important it was to listen to my own footfall as a competitive runner. That
Yeah, that's the Ethiopian way. Just
it's
running quiet.
well, I go back to basic high school physics. Sound is energy.
Yeah.
And the quieter you are, the more efficient you are. The less, if you're slapping.
Yeah, less friction.
Well, if you go this weekend to the Akron Marathon as a spectator and the leaders come by, you may hear conversation, but you might hear breathing. You won't hear footfall. That the footfall comes farther back in the pack.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, and I love that you're bringing this up. You're right, but you'll notice if you go watch the races now that if somebody has super shoes, like an Alpha Fly or like a Next Percent or something, a carbon fiber shoe, you'll probably hear sound.
Really?
Because the feedback is so poor on those shoes because of the carbon fiber plate.
Sure.
That it's hard to, like, you know what I mean? Like, land efficiently. Now, early in the race, that might not be true, but definitely later in the race in the marathon, you will hear even the leaders just like squeaking like crazy coming down that home stretch.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's just like it's because you can't get the proprioception through that carbon fiber plate, and it's leading to different kind of injuries. So the industry is changing from an injury perspective.
Now, again, while we're on sound and the fact that I ran for a long time, one of the major changes was when I started out, the tracks were cinder or crushed brick.
Crushed brick?
Crushed brick.
I've never heard that. That is insane.
Oh, no, it was fast.
I would imagine that's faster than cinder, but
oh, yeah.
Don't fall.
Oh, well, no, don't fall on cinders. You're picking them out of your forearms and elbows for a week. No. But yeah. So you learned the sound of your footfall on those surfaces. And you learned when the pace in a pack changed. Again, it's an 800-meter runner. You learned when the kicking was starting.
Yeah.
With your ears. And
that is so cool. So then when the rubberized tracks come, it kind of confused a lot of people.
Starting with me, my first race on a rubberized track was up at Bowling Green, and I was lost. It was like, yeah, it's fast.
That is crazy. I've never actually thought of that.
Yeah, it was
But I know what you're talking about, because here in Ohio, where we're at in Northeast Ohio, there's the towpath, which is crushed limestone. And when I was pretty fit, decade ago, 15 years ago, we would do these, like, we would hammer these long runs, and it always turned into just like, you just duked it out at the end, like, and you can tell when somebody was ready to go, like they were like, just immediately the sound just changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that was racing on cinders. And like I said, I wish I could remember the school that had the crush brick. I don't right now, but yeah. And so that was a major change. And so you started to listen to breathing rhythms and things, because you no longer had the easy sound to pick up.
I know. It's amazing how some of this is like lost art. Like, kids are, I don't think coaches teach these things anymore. Like, listen to the breathing, listen to their watch their hand posture, like read cues from your competitors to let you know how they're feeling internally. And it's like a lost art. Like, everybody's lost. They don't know what they're doing. Like, a lot of these coaches might not even know to even tell their kids that. But I feel like this is like really important information, that just subtle things that you can find, just mid race, that can help you.
I remember talking to one of Betsy's team about drafting and the fact that you don't have to lead. And certainly, change leaders if you're running in a pack.
Yeah.
That the person in second place behind a lead runner is using 6 to 8% less energy because they're not pushing that wall of air out of the way.
Yeah.
And that everybody, now, it's why when somebody loses the pack in a marathon, if you're watching a marathon, they
fall off quick.
They're gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're with the pack and you're hanging on to the pack, because if you lose the pack,
Yeah.
Safan Hussein's run this year.
In the Olympics, yeah.
Well, and at London before that, where both times she's managed to recover from that. It's just a tribute to how awesome she is.
Yeah, she's a freak.
Yep.
In a good way. Like really, 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 really talented.
Yeah.
Just tough. Does crazy workouts, insane stuff. Just makes her body just like a marathon's like nothing. So what would you say? Okay, so you got all this running wisdom, you've got all this experience, which seems like commonplace to you, not a big deal. But what would you say to a young up and coming runner? Say you had a high school kid, college kid here, and what would be something you would mention to them?
I think the one thing I learned over the years was the importance of rest. That back in the 70s, especially the 70s and into the 80s, we ran as close to, you could call it hard day, easy day, long day, short day. And if electrical storm was about the only thing that kept us from running.
Yeah.
And as such, we overtrained. That the importance of true rest, and not an easy day, not a gentle 4-miler. The idea of having a string where you haven't missed a day in 18 years or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And again, quoting my wife, I heard she had an athlete say, "Well, what do you mean by rest?" And Betsy said, by rest, I mean, go take a nap. And if you're not sure after the nap, call me.
Oh my God.
That's what I mean by rest is rest.
Yeah.
It's not going to a movie. It's not going out with your friends.
Yeah.
It's definitely not an easy run. It's not cross training. Rest is rest.
I know V-Hill he would always say, there's no overtraining, just under resting.
Absolutely. That I learned the hard way that one day undertrained is no big deal. One day overtrained and you wasted 6 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. Joan Benoit said later in her career that runners are crazy, and she kind of was just like speaking off the cuff. And she's like, runners would rather go into a race injured, sore, beat up, and overtrained than to even think that they were slightly undertrained. They'd rather the former.
And that's counterproductive.
Yeah. And
At
it's
least, and it's dangerous.
it actually is true. And when I talk to people about like how I'm like doing marathons on like low volume, it's like the little run club kind of thing.
Yeah.
They're blown away by it. And it's like, it's like nobody finds their basement. Everybody runs to find their ceiling, runs to find the threshold and then they surpass it and they go, oh, that was too much. It's like, I think that's fine, whatever, when you're like in your career, but the vast majority of us like need to know our basements, the bare minimum stimulus to get us some good output.
Runners too often are like race car drivers. They don't know how fast they can go until they spin out.
Yeah.
And you crash, and hopefully you learn from the crash. But it's still understood completely. And
Yeah, and that's also the thing where like you hear so many times in people's career they'll say, "Oh, I didn't even think I was going to run fast that day." It's like, well, you probably were like not overtrained, and you actually were able to go to the line healthy, and it's like a lot of those surprise sessions. Like when you ask somebody like, "What was your best race ever?" It most often is not what they were genuinely trying to peak for. It's something that snuck up on them.
too often it happened early in the season where they were coming off of, in quotes, base work.
Yeah,
And before they had started, to try to keep that volume.
just hammering themselves
Yep.
with intensity.
Yep. And the art of the taper.
Yeah.
That could be doctoral theses.
So what would you say? So, we had some intel, some insight for some younger individuals. What would you say to the older runners out there?
To the older runners,
I guess I would be considered older now. Older now. Older is
Okay.
relative, right?
okay,
Older as a verb, not a noun.
okay. To the older runners, good question. I guess as I progressed and I still had success into my 50s, I learned the importance of rest. I learned that hard day, easy day were not adequate definitions of a training run.
Hmm.
That I learned, various paces, various terrains. That a hill day was a hard day in some respects.
Yeah.
That I grew to really enjoy trail running and running on, not constantly pounding
Yeah.
on the pavement and not constantly having a time and a distance dictate a workout,
Yeah.
i.e., stay away from the track.
Yeah.
Now, the opposite of that is the other thing I learned as an older runner is that you can't turn speed on and off like a light switch. The idea of introducing speed work late in a training cycle to sharpen
Yeah.
is a good way to get hurt.
Yeah.
That there needs to be a speed component
Nice segue.
at least once every 10 days, 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I think that's a great advice for somebody older as well because your tendons and your muscles and your fascia, they're just not as pliable as they used to be. You don't absorb force like you used to, and so it's important to kind of, you know, uh, it's important to kind of challenge those structures consistently so
Yes.
there's not such a shock.
Yeah, because the shock is going to be an injury.
Yeah.
At least my experience, the experience of my generation as we all got older, that's and the other thing I had when my best competitive, I I did 2-a-days. But the morning run was always a very easy, it would probably even qualify as a warm-up pace,
Yeah.
because that's what it was. We used to refer to it as massage by motion. All we were doing, some people would think it was garbage miles, and
Yeah.
it wasn't.
No.
It was getting the body ready, warmed up, stretched out, whatever, for that evening's work, that evening's quality.
Look, anybody that says that volume, like runs like that, like, or just garbage mileage, doesn't actually understand the purpose of them. They're speaking strictly from a physiological perspective, like they're thinking like enzymatic threshold conversations. No, those are valuable from a musculoskeletal perspective. That's building the chassis, not the engine. That's the chassis. You're getting the tendons thicker, you're getting the fascia looser, you're warming up the muscles as you alluded to. You're putting better motion in the joints with synovial fluid. Those are all the beautiful things of that.
And you're flushing out the junk that you accumulated in yesterday's run.
Yeah.
I found that if the morning runs became easy, I knew I was ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that I continued doing 2-a-days at least 3 days a week into my 50s.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
And
I like them. I always feel great when I do them. You always feel like so much like a badass when you do them, you know?
Oh, there's a great mental and confidence boost that, and I never liked the first 5 or 10 minutes. I'm not a morning person. I won't kid about that, and people that know me know that. But once I was out there and moving, and I liked running in the city at night when it was quieter.
Yeah. It is so peaceful.
Yeah.
There's nothing like a winter run at night. It's like there's
when the
no
snow
wind.
is dry and the traction is good and every footfall is a little cloud burst. No, I can't. Yes.
It's some of the best stuff ever.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
yeah. I mean, there's just such beauty to it. And then this, the change of the leaves and everything and just the whole seasons. That's great.
Yep.
So we're kind of rounding third on the episode here. It goes by quick, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So any last kind of parting words for our listeners? Last tidbit of advice for some of the people out there that hanging out with us on this episode?
Well, to all those people out there who are thinking, I used to kick his butt. I want to say thank you, because you what motivated me. You pulled me. You allowed me to draft off of you. And I hope we're still friends.
It's all about friendship.
Yep.
So true. Well, I can't thank you enough, Eric, for coming on the episode. And
well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's been fun. Always. Ask an Irishman to tell stories. It's easy.
I mean, we could do 1,000 of these episodes. You have endless stories, and I know this to be true. But thank you again for spending the hour with us, and look forward to getting this episode out. So thank you for everybody that have joined us, and again, thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
All the best
to you too.
Dr. Leo here. Be sure to check out my new book, Faster Without Fail, Your Guide to Overcoming Injuries and Running Faster Than Ever. It is now available on Amazon. You could read reviews on the Amazon. You can check out what other people have said about it. But basically, if you want to revolutionize your running form and better understand how to stay injury-free within the sport, this is your guide. Feel free to reach out and let us know what you think of the book. I would love to hear your feedback. But again, please check it out on Amazon. Faster Without Fail. Appreciate it. Dr. Leo here. If you want to catch me in another setting, be sure to check out my YouTube page, Running Rehab, where you will find exercises on how to stay healthy with running, how to improve your running form, and a bunch of other tips and tricks on how to get over common injuries. So, again,